Hi, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Melody, if you were here for the last session. If not, hi. So with me now, I have Andras and Michael, and their talk is Seamless Threat Intel Sharing and Automation Using MISP. They're going to tell you a little bit more about themselves. So go ahead, Andras and Michael.
Hello. Okay. So yes, hello. This is Andras. I am Michael, and both of us we work for Circle. Circle stands for Computer Incident Response Center Luxembourg. So sorry, guys, no cyber yet. Okay. Circle is the CERT for the private sector and for the communes and all non-governmental entities. So basically, we are everything but not a GovCert. So maybe we are not so suspicious then. Okay, today we like to talk about MISP and how it helps in threat intel sharing and automation.
Okay, so welcome everyone. So a little bit of historic background about how this whole thing started and where we've come since we did. So basically, in 2012, there was this malware analysis working group between some CERTs in Europe that were analyzing various attacks that were happening in their constituencies. And something that we discovered very quickly was that a lot of the work on doing the reverse engineering and so on has been duplicated between all of these CERTs, and it was kind of a shame to waste all that effort. So we figured that something would have to be done to be able to share this information in a more rapid way. So this is 2012. There wasn't really anything at the time out there that did anything like that, at least efficiently. So Christophe van de Plas, who was working at the Belgian MOD at the time, decided that he would use his free time to build a small tool called Cyber Defense Signatures, which later on evolved to MISP. And it was a small sharing platform just for those few organizations taking part in it at first. So yeah, basically ever since then, the whole thing has been evolving in an open source community based on the input of the user base that we have. So the user base is of course ever growing, so this means that we get different types of input from the community on what's needed and so on. So as mentioned before, initially we started with a group of malware reversers. So it was very technical indicator focused. People were just exchanging the results of their analysis with their colleagues. But later on, based on these things that were already in MISP, the security analysts started to get more interested in it. So they wanted a way to feed their protective devices and to search in this data set that their colleagues were creating. So we expanded the scope of the application based on that. Then later on, with the additional data that was starting to build up in there, the intelligence analysts started to take note. They wanted to monitor trends, threat actors, and ongoing campaigns. And it started to make more sense to give them access and give the tools to those user groups so that they could participate. And since then, we have had a lot of interest from law enforcement, for example, for bootstrapping their incident response cases, and also for some other type of sharing that we're going to go into later, as well as risk analysis teams, and most recently also the financial sector sharing fraud information. So that means mule account information and so on. So our governance model is pretty simple. We basically listen to what our users tell us on GitHub and Gitter and all these various development-related platforms. We have a yearly summit in Luxembourg at a conference called Hacklu that we organize, where we discuss with some of the players that are interested. We give trainings all around the world to various organizations that are interested and gather feedback from what's needed in their organizations, as well as playing around with experimental features that either stick or not, depending on how they turn out. So sometimes we throw stuff away, sometimes we keep it. Okay, so basically one of the big hurdles when it comes to information sharing in this field is that the information is going to be used by different groups. So one of the biggest challenges we've been facing was that the data that arrives to these users via MISP would have a different tolerance for false positives. If you're using something for detection, it will have a different tolerance for false positives than if you use something for blocking. For example, ISPs do a lot of blocking based on the data that they receive and so on. So what we ended up coming up with as a solution to this was that we would leave it up to the consumer to decide what data set they want to feed to their devices, instead of limiting the data already on the receiving end. And another thing that this enables is to do intelligence. So one of the things that you always have to keep in mind with those indicators that might not seem relevant anymore is that for historic reasons, for correlation and so on, those things will matter over time. So have them in your database, but use the more fresh data for blocking or for detection. Okay. Another thing that has been a bit challenging for us was that sharing is something that organizations inherently don't want to do when it comes to their data. So this has various different hurdles that we try to overcome together with the communities that we work with. One of them is, of course, trust. So this is a typical issue that you have that you can only change over time and over getting to know the partners that you're exchanging information with. Legal restrictions. So one of our best solutions for that is sadly not that applicable over here. So we have a huge change coming in the legislature in Europe when it comes to data protection. And one of the clauses in the Data Protection Act that's coming up is that you have to use every technical measure to defend or to protect the data of your constituents. And sharing information is a technical matter, so this is something that we use as ammunition for the technical people against their legal teams that are trying to block them on actually exchanging this information. And then there are practical reasons which may seem logical at first, but they're actually not entirely true. For example, the response that organizations don't have information to share. For example, validating someone else's information is valid information. Reporting sightings is valid information. So even if you get this response from your partners, there is always something that they can share if they really want, without being able to report full-blown analysis reports back to you. Okay, so coming back to MISP itself. So the application itself is split into separate parts. We have the core application, which is written in PHP and Python. This has the core APIs and the user interface and all the tools around it. Then we have a modular system, which is meant for users to be able to build their own scripts for enrichment, data import, data export, and so on. And we have three different types of objects that are easy to create via JSON files that serve for classification, warnings against false positives, and for higher level threat intelligence data, such as threat actor information, tools used by threat actors, and so on. Okay. So MISP in itself is first and foremost an IOC and threat sharing platform. It is open source, it is free software, so we're not really here to sell anything. You can just download it and play around with it. It has a bunch of functionalities when it comes to sharing and to be able to share granularly to exactly those participants in your community that you want to share with, as well as tools for automatic correlation, easy input of data, and collaboration. So if you want to hook it up to your devices, this is not a comprehensive list at all, but we're supporting basically every major format that we are encountering through tools that users come to us with. If we don't support something that you're interested in, let us know. We'll probably build a tool for it or module for it anyway. Yeah, and after a bunch of trial and error and some failed stuff, some successful stuff, we are where we are with our current feature list with MISP. So about Circle itself, we're running some MISP communities out there. We have a pretty huge CERT and private sector community with a total of 700 organizations and around 1,500 users. So if you're interested in joining that community, all you need to do is be an organization that we basically know of and send us a PGP key, and then we can give you access to it. So yeah. Of course, there are a lot of communities that we know about but don't have any insight in them, and some communities that we don't know about at all. It's open source software, everyone can install it on their own premises, so we don't get any feedback on who's actually out there and using it, apart from the ones that we know. Some of the users of MISP that we know of are, for example, financial sector organizations, especially a lot of them in Europe, military and international organizations, national CERTs, and so on. Yeah. So for the sharing itself, one of the issues that we've seen a lot with other similar systems and with generally with the way a lot of vendors approach it is that they stick to a producer and a consumer model. And this is something that we wanted to stay clear of, and most of our data is pretty interactive. So that means that while all the data packages that are created in MISP are tied to an original creator, and that is the only one that can actually modify it, third parties can suggest changes that then can be accepted by the original creator. So we have a full-blown feedback loop system in there where anyone can propose changes, enrich the information, send those proposals back to the original creator, even if it is several MISP instances away, since these MISP instances synchronize with each other when you allow them to. So yeah. So basically, each one of these MISP data packages is a living document that gets updated over time by your community. So as a typical use case of what a MISP installation would look like in a smaller organization in this case, what we suggest people to do is to install two MISP installations, one for their boundary MISP, where they exchange information with their partners, and one internal one that they use, for example, to feed sandbox data and so on directly in and have an unfiltered large set of data that most of it might be junk, some of it might be useful and so on. So in this case, in this chart, we have Cuckoo hooked up to the internal MISP and a Greylog and the Hive. If anyone has heard of the Hive in here, that's another great tool that we interconnect with. It's an instant response tool, as well as feeding your MISP with additional feeds that are out there from either premium providers or SIN feeds. And in this chart, we also have some other MISP instances that we interconnect with. So the pipeline of how data would go into MISP, how it would be interacted with the users, and what the result would be is displayed in this little bit confusing chart. It's not comprehensive, but it's messy enough to not take anything more than what's on there. So basically, the things on the left side are the ways to input data. So if there are any Viper users out there, for example, that do their analysis in Viper, you have full-blown integration from Viper to MISP, so you can directly interact with MISP with it. You have integration with various sandboxes, such as Joe Sandbox or Cuckoo Sandbox. We ingest a bunch of other formats, such as OpenIOC, sticks, and so on. And you can interconnect with other MISPs, CSV feeds, and so on. Once the data is in MISP, you will get it enriched via other users on your instance or through other communities via proposals. And you can use something that we call enrichment modules. So right now we have something like 60 or so enrichment modules that are used to enrich the data that you have in there via services such as passive total, domain tools, and so on, or iris total. And also, if you have an instant response tool like the Hive running, you can interact with that directly with MISP and create cases and send the updated information back to MISP. If you're running Multigo, that's another thing that you can use. You can use MISP as an additional lookup service for it. And once you have all that data in there, you can then pass it on to your protective devices, so either to IDSs, SIEMs, whatever other tool you have in sticks or OpenIOC format, Intel MQ, if anyone's using it. And another important thing is that the data in there is supposed to help your analysts figure out trends, statistics, and threat intelligence information based on the data that you have in there. So in order to achieve this, one of the things that we've been working with is the ability to be able to ingest all of these various feeds into MISP. So we have some tools that give you access to ingest whatever tools you normally ingest with. And as of lately, we also allow the comparison of various feeds. So one of the things that people like to do using MISP is to get proof of concepts of various feed providers and just see what the overlap is between those feeds and then filter out which one is snake oilish and which one is actually useful. So you will immediately see where those feed providers take their data from. Sorry if there are any feed providers out there. I'm very sorry. Okay, maybe not, but so yeah. So indeed, so this whole idea came. If anyone has seen MLSec's presentation on threat intelligence quotient, that's where we got our inspiration from. So we're blown away by it, and we've been building this tool since we've seen that. one of the other things that is very interesting is that depending on what community you're dealing with, the classification of data is going to be wildly different from each of them. So what we found to be a solution to accommodate all of these communities was to create taxonomies that they can reuse across communities then. So for a very simple example for is Veris. So a lot of organizations use Veris for various things. So we created a Veris taxonomy that can be reused by all the communities, and it would link up to the data that your partners are creating. So basically these tags that are coming from the taxonomies are used for filtering both on a synchronization level and also on an ingestion level, and also on your automation level. So when you're feeding your IDSs, for example, you can use the various taxonomies to filter the data. There are currently 45 or so existing taxonomies out there, and we get additional input from third-party organizations non-stop about those. So if you're interested in creating something that you use in your organization, it's as simple as creating a JSON. Or if you don't like doing that, there is also a Python library that should make it a bit easier. Okay. Okay, so basically just a very quick explanation before Micha takes over. Everything that we have in MISP, the main data package that contains all the information is called an event, which is built up of attributes. So an event for us is a contextual container that tells you what the intent of that package is and who can see it, who has created it. And attributes are the actual atomic values that are in there. So that could be an IP address that is described by context, what we call a category, for example, network activity, and the type that describes whether it's an IP address, for example. So this is just a little bit of an explanation before he starts with it. And maybe since we're running a bit low on time, we can skip that part. And here we go.
Okay, now we have heard already very much on theory. Now I will show some practical examples, some practical use case. And even there are already the use cases which origin from those threat intelligence sharing from the early beginnings, even though today we find new use cases. So one example. What do we have here? Check first the date. Yeah. So this pops up while I was on the airport and waiting for the doors open so that I can start to come to Australia. And what do we have here? Well, we have a list of URLs. Those URLs are basically obviously from all over the world. We have Pakistani, we have Brazil, we have .com, we have Argentina. And even though we have many com.australia domains in this list, so if you are in the list, call your sysadmin, then something goes wrong. And we have, in the URL, we have the path wp admin and admin-ajax.php, and at the end you have the parameter wp-config.php. So basically, what do we have here? So we have a list with strange-looking URLs. In total, this is just a screenshot. In total, it was 85 URLs. And obviously, there was one .lu URL within. This is why it pops up at my laptop. So we have to investigate what is behind these URLs. Okay, I check. And what we have database name, we have database user, we have password, we have host name, and some other key material. Well, that is not good, I would say, to have this publicly accessible on the internet. So something has to happen. We have to help. So first of all, we have to help our constituency. So immediately I check up whois and other sources to get some email addresses to even at the airport to send out some alerts. And it was Saturday, so hopefully somebody read it as soon as possible. But what can we do with the others? We cannot do this for everybody, for all the world. That's not possible. It's just too much. Well, one idea is to identify the responsible certs and then alert the certs. But then, okay, for 85, it's already much work, but it don't scale, basically. and probably there are other issues. The certs don't answer, and you have to follow up. So it don't scale. That's not the best solution. The best solution would be to have a platform where you can put your information, and everybody is connected, and check and put out what he is responsible for. But wait, we have a platform. So I just connected to the MISP platform and create an event. This is how it looks from the user interface view. You have, I create the event WP config files on pastebin. I classify, giving the text TLP green and OSINT source type pasty site. I also make some other classifications, so, for example, circle incident classification, vulnerability, and the various classification misconfiguration. I choose the threat level low, and I say the alarm is basically completed. There's not much to do left. And we publish the event, and basically I also add 170 attributes. So we take a look at the attributes. That's how it looks here. So we categorize it as network attributes of the type URL, and then we put the complete URL into the database. Well, very important, you have the IDS row. This means for intrusion detection system. We do not like that this URLs raise an alert at the intrusion detection systems. That's why it's set to no. And now, think further, we had 85 URLs, but we had 170 events. What does this mean? Or why is it that like this? It's because I put the 85 URLs in, then I make extraction of the host name and put also 85 events with the host names only in. And why I did this is for correlation usage, because I like to see, does this host names already pop up more early with other incidents, or in the future, will those host names pop up again? So that's I'm interested for. And now some example with some correlations. We have 3 events, again pastebins. Those pop up in March, 21 March. And it's a list with more than 5,500 compromised websites with backdoors. 1 week later, we have a comparable posting, again 5,500 backdoors, and 1 week later, we have again a posting. Then we do not have any more postings, because from this point on, there was no LU site anymore on those listings. They was all cleaned up. In the second row, next to the number of events, attributes in these events, you see the correlations. So basically, each of these events correlate with 2 other events. Basically, they correlate with each other. So now we show how this looks in form of a graphical representation. So we have the first event. In the bottom, we have the second event. And here we have the third event. And the PCs which are listed, or the hosts, the URLs which are listed in the middle here, they have the luck to be in relation with all the 3 events. This means they are not cleaned up since more than 2 weeks. So why are we so interested in those correlations? This is not part of this talk, but I like to answer your question at the end of the talk in the question and answer part. Now Andras will continue with the presentation.
Okay. So basically what Michael has shown was one specific use case. So this was not, of course, the original use case that you use MISP for, but we're finding that more and more things can be shared with the same community that you've already built up. So this was, of course, not the same type of indicator sharing that we have. Another use for this correlation is, for example, finding interesting links between various campaigns that you would normally miss based on some similarities between those events. So, for example, an interesting use case that we like to mention about this was the Grizzly Step report, which I'm sure many of you have seen, which included a bunch of network indicators. And for example, we also maintained lists of Tor exit nodes in our MISP instance, known Tor exit nodes. And immediately you could see the correlations, which one of those IP addresses in the Grizzly Step report were, for example, actual Tor exit nodes instead of direct indicators of an attacker. Okay, so going back to this, so basically one of the things that we've seen here, so this was all very UI-centered, but one of the things that we wanted to do with MISP was to be able to open it, the usage of it up, not just via the UI, but API and external tools with the same feature set. So this means that some of the users of MISP will never actually touch MISP itself. We will have users that are just using Viper. We will have people using completely different tools out there, such as Maltego that just queries MISP and so on. And these are all valid use cases. So the idea is that we didn't want to lock the users into a single interface. So here's just a small example. For example, this is the simplest part if you are a UI user on how to input data into MISP. If you get a PDF report, you can just drop the contents into the free text parser, and it will try to find all the indicators from the text and create the appropriate data out of it with the recommendations on what types and categories they should be in. So this is just one method of how else you can input data. Of course, you can manually create the data as well, go through a templating system and so on. Another thing that has been an interesting challenge for us is, since we're based in Luxembourg, a lot of the organizations that we are involved with are financial sector organizations. And one of the biggest concerns for these organizations when it comes to sharing is not having their names on the data that they share. So every time a financial sector organization shares information about an attack, even if it was unsuccessful, it wavers the faith in them for the constituency. So one of the most wanted requests from this particular community was a way to be able to entrust a third party to publish that data. So if you're in one of these situations and you're one of the organizations sitting on top of sharing community, for example, you're an ISAC that is responsible for financial sector organizations, they can delegate the publication of this data to your organization without their name ever showing up. So the idea is to still get the indicators out there that are important, to still get feedback from that on the community, still get additional feedback in form of enrichment, sightings, and so on that data. So you can still do that without revealing who you actually are. Another thing that came mostly from the military and international organization community was sharing groups. So these are distribution lists that allow you to particularly pick which parts of the data you're sharing with which partners, and reusable groups that you reuse for sharing. And this is something that is encompasses both your community and all the interconnected communities. So I can, for example, specify that I want to share information with the financial sector institutions in Benelux states, and also additionally, for example, governmental certs all over Europe. So that would be a use case for a sharing group. So this is something that we've been working on a lot to enable. So I've already mentioned sightings a bit. Another interesting part of information sharing is that there has to be a feedback loop of the information that's in there. So besides the indicators themselves, another valuable component of it is seeing the activity of these indicators. Is it still something that occurs in people's networks? Is it still something active? And this citing system allows you to give that feedback, as well as giving feedback on potential false positives and saying that, okay, I've seen this in my network, it is actually google.com, so maybe you shouldn't alert people about that. So we have this feedback loop that works through the API as well. So what we've been trying to do is hook this up to IDSs, SIEMs, and so on, to have an automated feedback directly on the data that is basically being triggered by these devices. So yeah, moving on. So basically, I've already mentioned false positives a little bit and touched on this issue and how to resolve them. So this is the biggest issue when it comes to any information sharing, is basically the issue of false positives, especially if you're dealing with detection or blocking. So one of the things that we're trying to do is we want to warn users of obvious false positives that are there. So we created something called a warning list system, where users can create their own warning lists, apart from a huge repository of existing ones that are out there. To warn users if there is something going into the system that is obviously something that is incorrect. So this might include internal network addresses, as well as known good websites and so on. And then another way of combating it would be crowdsourced data validation. So again, this goes back to the whole proposal system and the citing system, and allowing your constituents to tell you that your data is correct or not. And another thing is, if you want to be even more strict about it, you can set up input filters that, for example, block any IP address from your IP range to be entered into your MISP instance, so to avoid accidental leaks of information that shouldn't go out there, and so on. So if you want to get started and you have, then one of the biggest challenges, of course, is you set up a new system, you have no data in there, you have no idea what the data should look like or how to get started. We offer a bunch of feeds. One is produced by ourselves, which is our OSINT feed, but there are now other organizations that are putting these free MISP feeds out there that you can just ingest and already have properly created data set in your system, which is handy for correlation and also seeing how to get started. So if you're interested in it, just download it and play around with it. Yeah. So for the future and near future on what's coming for MISP, this is probably more interesting for the people that have already used MISP. I don't know if there are many in the audience though, since we're pretty far away from home. But MISP objects is one of them. So one of the ideas is that you want to be able to create more bundled objects that describe a specific things such as a file, a network activity, and so on, instead of having loosely hanging attributes within an event. Another thing is, of course, and this is the ever-evolving list of connectors and integrations with other tools. If you have ideas, let us know about it. We also want to work, and we have several projects that relate to situational awareness and dashboards. So we have all this information in there, but we want to be able to visualize it and give this as a feedback to users. Gamification, we've seen interesting talk from HP on this. We were not convinced at first. By the end of the talk, we were absolutely blown away. To get your community to share, you have to give them some incentives. It can be something silly as gamification. If you've ever used GitHub and you paid attention to your heat map for your contributions, you'll know how addictive it can get. If you're interested in contributing to it, we always welcome any ideas. So we're on GitHub, Gitter, and so on. Just open an issue, let us know about it. If you want to do a pull request, we're even happier. So that's always very nice if you implement something yourself and want to share that. Or alternatively, there is always the option, if you can't do it yourself, to have a co-funding for a project. Another thing that we're really interested in, by the way, if you have students doing their thesis and so on, and you want a research project for it, let us know, because we have a lot of ideas for those, and we're always looking for students that want to contribute to it. So that's basically it. So to wrap it up, information sharing, the most important thing is sharing practices. What we want to do is we want to enable the users to be able to share transparently without getting into your way. Another thing is that we understand that different communities have different needs, and we are trying to build the tools that to customize your community to your needs. If you're interested, go to our GitHub page, go to download the tool or raise issues. We're always hanging out on Gitter. It's a chat that is tied to GitHub. You'll need a GitHub account to it. We're basically there 24/7. And if you want to follow updates on what's going on, we have a Twitter account. Just follow that, and we usually post everything that's happening that's new out there. And that's basically it. So thank you for your attention. And if you have any questions.
If there's any questions, I have a microphone here, and I'll run it to you so everyone can hear the question.
Yep.
Okay, all the way at the back.
Okay.
Shout it and I'll repeat it.
Sorry? Yes, they are.
Okay, so the question was, sorry,
yeah,
are
sorry.
any threat intel vendors sharing?
Yeah, basically on our platform, our private sector platform, we have a bunch of the antivirus vendors as well as threat vendors that are sharing their information, as well as through lookup services for vendors that have provided modules to do lookups against their services. So yeah.
Anyone else?
So thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. I have a gift for each of you from AusCERT. Thanks for that presentation. It was great. Very interesting stuff, and obviously, yeah, very, very important. So yeah, once again, another round of applause, please, for Andras, Iklody, and Michael Hamm.